started down there, but so I'll do it geographically. So I'll start over here, and then I'll go to the centre, and then I'll go to the bottom left panel. Okay, so put your hand over this side. So one there, one there, one there. So this side.
Thank you. Thank you for a fascinating talk. But I wondered about the robustness of some of the figures you quote, given that the NHS has announced £1 billion provider deficit this week, and recent estimates have suggested that the NHS needs an additional £4 billion per annum to get themselves out of the current difficulties and pressures, and similarly for social care.
Right. Okay.
Thank you for your clear talk. And the question I have is around private debt, deficit spending, and quantitative easing. One of the big issues that you didn't talk about that started to appear in the 1960s is a constant expansion of private debt as a result of a move towards fiscal conservatism, i.e. trying to balance the books. Previously to that, we used deficit spending to ensure full employment and a great deal of social mobility. Now you say that it's not possible to print money to pay for the things we need, but we managed to print £500 billion worth to save the banks, which added to the inflation of asset prices and also contributed to the expansion of the debt economy. Now those are probably the real issues underneath that. Now I do agree with you about wealth tax. So there's a point there rather than a question.
Great.
Thanks for a very stimulating talk, David. As a health professional, the World Health Organization concept of health and all policies keeps going through my head. And if the key driver of the cost part of this equation is the cost of healthcare, did the Commission model what the impact on population health would be of these changes? For example, improving education should reduce dementia in old age, improving working conditions should reduce heart disease in middle age, and better quality housing. I don't think anyone has researched security housing and health, but certainly better quality housing is associated with reduction in common conditions like respiratory illness. So given that it's the health costs that are driving your planning, I was wondering if you'd consider the impact of these suggestions, these proposals, on population health.
Yeah, and it's interesting, 2 or 3 questions about the NHS. Well, and on this, we drew heavily, I was just checking the references in our fuller discussion of the report, we drew on estimates from the Office of Budget Responsibility and others. We don't get into exactly the immediate pressures this year, and whether it's 2 billion or, there's a lady over there asking whether it's 2 billion or 4 billion, I'm not going to sort of die in the ditch about that. But what we did take was some long-term trends, and so which shows health spending rising by about 5 percentage points of GDP over the next 50 years. We think, and what we also said is that on the kind of spending pressures that have been identified, it ends up with an extra bill of 24 billion a year by 2030. We did not do a massive extra sort of model of our own. These were taken from classic models, notably from Public Health England and the Office of Budget Responsibility. And we each show different variants with different life expectancy or whatever. But if you do low health costs, high health costs, low life expectancy, high health expectancy, you get a range. All of them nevertheless show the same basic underlying picture. The core narrative is very empirically robust. which is as those big surges, those big age cohorts grow older, the NHS, the pressures on the NHS and the upward pressures on NHS spending grow substantially and will require further taxes. But we have a full account in the report, which you can also see on our website. On the private debt point, and so I think quantitative easing was the right thing to do at the time in the circumstances, but indeed it is one of the factors pushing up asset prices, and again, sometimes once you look at things as generationally, once again it seems to work to the advantage of the boomers. But, and it's a really important but, and I don't know what some of the other speeches that you've had as part of this conference have said, but I don't think there is some special group, some other, be it bankers, the financial system, monetary laxity or whatever, which means that we as a society can somehow get through all this without most of us having to chip in some way. And one of my, and so this is a cross-party point for I think the Chancellor now is wrestling with this dilemma. But I sometimes get from the left when I make these type of arguments, it's very simple, just tax the banks. And if we just tax the banks, we could fund all this without having to do uncomfortable things for middle-income baby boomers who I'm targeting. I'm only targeting them because I wish to exempt bankers or whatever. On the kind of figures that we are talking about, this does require some collective acts of payment. And I am, if I were a socialist, which I'm not, I would be an anti-socialist, not the kind of socialist which is an appeal to the obligations of a national community where everybody chips in when they can afford to, not the modern sort where you have a group of them somewhere else who are supposed to pay all the money. And when we look at the borrowing, and we do go through the borrowing scenario, and you could imagine us if you borrowed a bit more money, but if on the kind of range of figures we have for public spending, if you financed all that out of increased borrowing, by the middle of the century, the stock of public debt would exceed 200% of GDP. Be significantly higher than even Italy today. So we don't think it can all be borrowed. We think we have to somehow find some taxes that most people regard as fair and acceptable, that the generality of British citizens are willing to pay in order to pay for services that most of us expect to be able to access.
And the point about housing then, the housing effect, the effects of housing on health.
Yeah, there are feedback mechanisms, and to be honest, we didn't get into those. We did take different assumptions on life expectancy, but from other reports, notably Public Health England and Office of Budget Responsibility.
Right, 4 questions in the middle. One there, well, in fact, there are 4, so you can all have a go. 1, 2, 3, 4. So, these are all net. I meant to in the middle. So you go first then.
We heard in an earlier talk in this series that housing fairness and opportunity is critically dependent on getting back to some of the old income to house price ratios that the boomers enjoyed. And one of the means of that is to, in a sense, kind of suppress the rampant house price rises that seem to be endemic. And one of the ways of doing that is to increase supply, and is recommended that one of the key things to do would be to abolish Harold Macmillan's 1961 Land Compensation Act that rewards farmers and people with land without planning consent with a massive untaxed windfall. Would the Resolution Foundation support this?
You kept carefully clear of engaging in any arguments about equality, but as a consequence of that, you didn't say anything about any structural factors that contribute to the siphoning off or the redistribution of wealth upwards. So the question is, to what extent has that been considered? You mentioned that you did some whole generational thinking ahead. And are your proposals robust enough that unless those structural effects are addressed as well, that this situation will not just repeat itself in the next generation as wealth moves further up the scale?
I don't know if this is just a category error and talking about left and right is the wrong thing, but when I was in my 20s, you were one of the people that I loved to hate. Here I am sitting here thinking that you're talking a hell of a lot of sense at the age of 48. So my question is, have I just got more right wing as I get older? Or have you got more left wing? And if there's something else going on, I'd love to hear how you got to this place that I find quite surprising.
This is just a question about something you said that I didn't understand, which is the abolition of inheritance tax and the substitution of a tax on receipts. I just wonder if you could say a bit more about that.
Right, I mean, on income to house price ratios and we have a proper discussion of some of this, and some of the community land auctions down at the bottom there would be structured in a way that you would actually divide up the value of planning gain. I have some sympathy with the idea that if you granting planning consent to agricultural land leads to a massive gain for the people owning the agricultural land, and it shouldn't all accrue privately, and I can see that argument. And that's part of what community land auctions can achieve. And in general, we do need to build more houses. Experts like Kate Barker, and Kate was on our commission as well, Kate warned us that there is no quick fix that transforms house price ratios to incomes rapidly. With all this type of stuff together, getting more second homes back out on the market, getting more houses built, changing the balance of tax on housing consumption would certainly move things in the right direction, and we hope over time to bring it down. Then there's this, on 125,000, and I'll turn to the left figure, on 125,000, the idea is that there is a record kept of receipts that people make of more than, say, £2,000 or £3,000. And if you inherit £50,000 from your granny, fine, but you record that you've inherited £50,000. And if you then inherit another £100,000 from an aunt, the total takes you to £150,000, and in our account, you then pay 20% tax on the last 25,000. And that is instead of, at the moment, you work out the value of the granny's estate or the aunt's estate, and you tax the value of that estate. So you create an incentive for granny to have, if she had £1 million, to distribute it amongst her 8 grandchildren and to spread it out. It's very crudely, and it's not an original idea because it's been around for a long time. That's what we advocate. On this wider thing of the politics, I suspect perhaps we both changed a bit. I would say that I think one of the reasons why I wrote Pinch was that, let me take you through a thought experiment, which was indeed done as a real life sort of opinion polling, attitudinal experiment. Imagine that we, all of us in this room now, are the custodians of a patch of woodland over which, between us, we have absolute property rights. And the first proposition that's put to us is someone who turns up and says, I will buy your patch of woodland off you. I will pay you X million pounds for this woodland. You can each have £20,000, whatever it is, as your return for owning this woodland. And the price of wood is high, woodland's valuable, now's a great time to sell it. Would you or would you not wish to obtain that asset that you own? Proposition 1. Proposition 2 is someone turns up and says, you own this lovely patch of woodland in a built-up area, and the But there are people who don't own the woodland who would love their kids to play there. Please will you open up the amenity value of your woodland to the rest of the community? And I think in a way, going back to the introduction, that is kind of classic right v left politics. There's a kind of right-wing argument about economic rationality, where the owners, this is what it's worth, would be claiming for it. And there's a left-wing argument about a distributional claim on a wider access for the community. But neither of them, I think, but then there's the third proposition, and someone says, the only reason you own this woodland is that previous generations passed it on to you. And above all, the obligation you have is to pass on this woodland to future generations in at least as good a condition as you found it. That is the crucial obligation. And my view is that politics had got so stuck in the first two types of arguments that the third sort of argument is not being deployed by politicians from any political party. But incidentally, in the study that was done, it was the third argument that got to people in their guts more powerfully than either of the previous two. So I'm trying to bring that sort of way of thinking into day-to-day political discussion, and I think that's why it genuinely is a cross-party exercise. You can mediate it through a left-wing or a right-wing view of the world, but it's asking people just to think, hang on, what is the generational impact? What is the impact of otherwise conventional policy proposals between different generations? Because surely, as we get older, I guess that is what's interesting, as one gets older, you think, what is the kind of world we're trying to pass on to our kids and grandchildren?
Okay, well, we'll divert from the model a bit. So there's one over there. So you two and then you, and then we'll come down to this bottom. Still too many, yeah, still too many names.
Thank you, sir. Hypothetically speaking, if you were 30 years in the past and a young millennial who might have just finished a Cambridge course in sustainability and graduated last year, hypothetically speaking, and you were meeting with a professor tomorrow, it just so happens, at the Resolution Foundation to go over potential PhD work at lunchtime, hypothetically speaking, what research question most excites you that you think would be the most applicable, not just here in the UK, but in the States too? Because we have our own intergenerational problem, and of course we have our own book called Generation of Sociopaths that documents that. It's not as well written as yours, but anyway, if you were in that position in terms of social and human capital sustainability research topic, what do you think would be the best to go forward with?
Yeah, thanks, Steve.
Hi, I thought it was a very, very interesting lecture. My question is about the metro mayors. Do you think you should be given more powers to tackle the problems, inequalities with early years education, particularly in city regions like Greater Manchester and Liverpool? And also as well, do you think they should be given more finance and powers to tackle the problems of vocational education in those regions, as well as the issues of worklessness?
There was a comment over here.
Given your interest in the third argument and the custodial approach, how do you square that with the social housing, public housing on the right to buy, which seems to have completely destroyed any form of custodial social housing for future generations?
Yeah. On the this hypothetical question, very ingenious, very ingenious. I mean, there are lots of ways. This is there are lots of ways in which this agenda plays out. I mean, something maybe reflecting my own interest is that there's a kind of the vocational and technical training for the over 18-year-olds who aren't on a route into higher education. I mean, this is well recognised. It seems to me is where we do have a problem. And if you pressed me on whether we really knew how to design a £1 billion better jobs deal and 1.5 billion for technical education in ways that work, the truth would be I'm not totally confident that we really know exactly how to do that. and we didn't have the resource to really dig into the evaluations. So I would say fleshing out that agenda would be a useful area where we could do more work. On the metro mayors, and incidentally, I'm a bit of an early years sceptic. And actually, in a separate book I wrote that came out at the end of last year called University Education, which is really about all the HE side, I have a whole chapter on why I think the early claims for early years are exaggerated. But in general, I think the more powers to metro mayors is a good idea. One could imagine them having some powers over the spending of at least some of the apprenticeship levy. And we had quite a lively debate in the commission, but I think it was not such a prominent proposal, it was even on my chart, but whether or not you should be able to forbid sales of properties to overseas purchasers. And on that, I'm still an unreconstructed kind of liberalist. I just don't like the idea of having to show your passport before you buy. But we did compromise on it would be a power that elected mayors could have if they wanted to bring in some further regulation of ability of people from abroad to buy houses in their area. So we proposed decentralising that. And then the gentleman, yes, on social housing. I don't like custodianship. I think trusteeship is the right word. Custodianship is a bit too keen. But look, I don't mind the sales of council houses, provided that you then replenish the stock. And again, part of what we have to do, and that's why in the housing proposals there was a proposal for extra resource for local authorities. We absolutely do understand that you need, the bottom there, the 1.7 billion building preset. This is proper policy wonkery. What I'm proud of in this report is that I do think we try to live up to David's requirement, actual working policy. We said there's currently a social care preset. We say this, you can actually fund social care in other means, and you take the social care preset and divert it into help funding local authorities building council housing. So there is a proposal there. Not massive, but it's a start.
Why do you feel the need to continue to insist that they sell the properties they've already got?
Well, I don't mind the sort of convection effect of people moving on into owner occupation, provided that you've got a supply for the younger generation coming on behind. So my view is that the challenge is building more houses and available in a variety of forms, certainly including more housing in the available for rented social housing sector. I don't mind local authorities' stock being renewed and replaced.
Right, finally over this side. Claire.
Do I need a mic? No.
Who's telling you?
I was a bit worried about, I was a bit worried about your tax on occupational pensions, talking about contracts, because being of just in the baby boomer generation, there were a lot of people that I knew that worked in the public sector, and the contract was you're going to work in the public sector, you're going to have poor pay all your life, but you're going to have a good pension. So I think that tax on occupational pensions sounds possibly rather aggressive.
So then behind you.
Antony Carpen. I used to work in the civil service as a policy advisor, and one of the things I found was we never did any policy evaluation. Now, a couple of the things that you've mentioned, for example, with the council tax policy, you said needs refreshing. How would you go about building that into the model? And you mentioned earlier that you are a conservative, and Cambridge used to be a safe as houses conservative seat for over a century, but it hasn't had conservative councillors in more than double figures since the millennium, and doesn't have any conservative councillors at all now. Given that ministers and prime ministers wax lyrical about how wonderful Cambridge is and how it's this economic dynamo, why are the people of Cambridge rejecting the Conservatives time and time again?
Guys, local knowledge.
It's obviously an excellent Lib Dem candidate.
Ben will explain to you later.
So, first of all, thank you, and secondly, you don't have to answer political questions. You're here to talk about inequality, but that's your choice. I very much agree with you that there is no bête noire that we can slay that will solve all our problems. And I read very recently an article by Matthew Stewart in The Atlantic. It's the sort of figurehead piece in the last issue. It's fantastic analysis of inequality in America. And he has a graph that I wish I could show everyone, but it shows from 1930 to 2010, and it shows that the top 0.1% have been doing very well since about 1975 and shot back up. And then the bottom 90% have seen their share declining in almost mirror image. And then you have what he calls the 9.9%, which is the rest of the professional classes and so on, that have held on to about 60% of the entire stock of wealth throughout that time. So my question to you, based upon that analysis of where the money is, it is the boomers because we've got older and richer, but of course there are poor boomers and there are young professionals doing their own time. There was nothing in what you said. It was great stuff and very supportable, but there was nothing in there about corporate tax share. There was nothing about trusts and the way that, for example, the Duke of whatever, who owns a third of London, died, and then the young Duke got it all because it's all in a trust. And so those kind of trusts and international arbitrage for corporates, and the big four who write the rules and then get paid again to tell people how to avoid them. There's a massive amount of work to be done right at the top end that isn't really intergenerational. So perhaps I shouldn't be asking, since I asked you here to come talk about intergenerational. But if you are talking about redistribution and fairness and leaving it for the next generation, those areas, financial transaction tax, land value tax, all kinds of ways to get at the wealth that is being siloed up in the way you described at the end of your talk, which Matthew Stewart talks very convincingly about. And I'd love to hear what you have to say about that.
And how to deal with us corporate lawyers.
Well, I mean, on the taxing on the occupational pensions, we are only proposing a tax at the rate of 6% on an income above £12,000. A lot of people, their occupational pension pays less than that. It is the case overall that whilst there are individual low-income pensioners, and virtually nothing that we're proposing would affect them, other than making sure their healthcare and social care is properly funded. The fact is that we about 5 years ago, a bit more, I think in 2008, Britain for the first time in recorded social history was in a situation where pensioners were less likely to be poor than working age families. Now, in a way that's progress. For 30 years the great challenge was poverty amongst old people. It's good that old people are doing better, but it has left us now with this extraordinary position that poverty is now to be found elsewhere. If you are a low-income pensioner, as I say, and as soon as whenever I say that, I have to be so carefully, I'm talking averages. There are indeed low-income pensioners, but our measures are designed for them to be pretty well protected. On council tax, we have an analysis in the main report of the generational impact of council tax, which is, again, I say it myself, the kind of areas where I just think the analysis, I think we're the first people to have looked at it in that way, and it is very striking. The council tax is basically shifted, so it's less and less of a burden on older people who have high-value properties, and more of a charge on younger people who have low-value properties. And it has, if you just look at it by age, it is quite a shocking picture. On your very fair, challenging question, kind of what is it in the politics of Cambridge, which actually relates to this wider argument, which we also heard about, where you cannot take all the money from the very rich. I think what has happened, for me as a Conservative, my party was very successful in appealing to the people in the middle, who identified themselves as having similar interests to people at the top. People in the middle were also property owners. They wanted to enjoy the protection of continuing to own their owner-occupied property. They had a decent job. They were you could construct a coalition of people with a stake in society. For younger generations, someone in the middle, their life looks more like the life of someone with a very low income than the life of someone who is towards the top of the heap. You're more likely to be in a private rented system. You're more likely, in other words, to be facing some of the vulnerabilities and uncertainties and pressures that people on very low incomes have had to wrestle with for generations. So you start seeing a kind of coalition of the dispossessed in which the people at the bottom of the heap and the people in the middle think that they have an alignment of interest against a group of owners who have captured the wealth at the top, who tend also to be older. Now, the different parties can have that. I think, for me as a Conservative, is a massive threat to the long-term success of my party. That's why this issue of people under 40 or whatever, or under not voting Conservative, is a very serious one. If you just thought it's a life cycle effect and don't worry, they'll come round to be Conservative, that would be fine. But as it looks very hard for them to build up anything, right, the aspects the generations before have done, it looks tricky. That is why, although what I'm saying I realise is uncomfortable for my party, I actually think it is necessary in order to ensure its long-term success and survival. And I'm not sure that's a concern that many people in this audience, but I actually think having a proper, in the best sense of the word, Conservative party that believes in this kind of, that stands for being the kind of flywheel of society where people have a stake in it and their stake is protected and that they have the opportunities of ownership, is actually a very important feature of a successful society. And I do worry if the young generation are all part of the precariat.
Great. Well, as a special, yes.
Sorry,
other ways of doing it.
I know there were about 8 parts.
The answer is
defence against the dark arts.
I'm just going to repeat my earlier point. I don't think there is a model where the kind of the 5% of GDP public expenditure pressure we're talking about can all be dealt with by them, by some group, by dukes and plutocrats and bankers. I can see you could get some out of it. In fact, it'd be rather important that you, and I'm not against all the some of the things you're talking about, but there is no way that a society can see its welfare state spending grow on the scale that is necessary just for us baby boomers to enjoy the healthcare and the pensions that we expect without us or some other people in even poorer circumstances now as chipping in. Secondly, setting aside how much money they've got, the general view, and from people, I can't name names, say Paul Johnson, head of the IFS, because we obviously had in the commission whole sessions on welfare, wealth tax. He said taxing wealth is very hard. Getting at it and taxing it when people are just sitting on it is hard. And they can convert wealth from one form to another. If they convert it into diamonds or old master paintings or whatever, how do you get it? He said, insofar as you get at wealth, you want to get at it when it's moving around. It's when it's moving that you can extract. That was part of the thinking behind taxing the money when you receive it, the occupational pension income, because pension wealth is a very substantial form of wealth in the UK. It's the argument for taxing people as they receive bequests. So we took advice from the experts that tax it as it moves.
Financial transactions tax?
Well, I think the danger with the financial transactions tax, the kind of Robin Hood tax that Richard Curtis was on, was that I think you could drive financial transactions elsewhere, it's quite important for the deep markets of the City of London that you still have very high volumes of transactions. And the city, I mean, if you actually look, and it's not, I don't think it's even out in this report, it's something else that I did. If you look at the distribution of income and tax, you do find that since the crash, believe it or not, under successive governments, the taxation of bankers and bankers' bonuses and banks has actually gone up. And if you were really just trying to measure movements of equality and inequality in the last few years, you would find at the very top, bankers' bonuses are not as big as they were pre-crash, but for a time benefits were at least, sadly it's just coming to an end, but for a time benefits were at least rising in line with prices when wages for a time weren't even rising by that amount. So you had a degree of protection at the bottom and a degree of reduction at the top. So the story of British society in the last 5 or 10 years is, if anything, a slight narrowing of income gaps because of more subdued situation in the city and a bit of protection for benefit payments. So I don't mind having all this, but I think it is, I have to say with greatest respect, it's to avoid having to confront what is the biggest single question, which is what we as a think tank and people who don't have to run for election anymore putting on the table. How much are all of us willing to pay for services that we receive? If you accept there isn't some other group somewhere else that we can charge for the services we wish to receive, on what basis and how fairly are we all going to contribute? And my view is it's the starting point of responsible politics to confront that uncomfortable question rather than identifying some other group over there, because don't worry, we can extract the money from them and then the NHS will carry on with extra money from them and we won't have to pay anything. And my view is that this is the future of politics. And my party, although the 2017 manifesto was so, the proposal on social care went so badly and was so ineptly presented, this was the first Conservative Party manifesto for a generation that did not have tax cuts in it. And my view is that the central forecast I'm offering for British politics is the era of offering tax cuts is over. The future agenda is how you have socially acceptable, equitable, but also credible ways of raising extra taxes to pay for the welfare state that people expect to receive.
Thank you.